I didn't realize how quiet the mountains could get until the sound of fire drowned everything else out. Not the crackle you hear at a campfire. This was the violent hiss of plastic melting, propane venting, and months of careful preparation being erased in minutes. $22,000 of winter supplies burned while 4 HOA board members stood there smiling like they'd just won something. That wasn't excess. That wasn't hoarding. That was survival. Up here in the Colorado Rockies, winter isn't a season. It's a sentence. 6 months of isolation. Roads that disappear overnight. Temperatures that punish mistakes without mercy. And in that fire was everything my 78-year-old mother depended on to survive it. Her medications. Her labeled containers. The routines that keep dementia from turning confusion into terror. They called it emergency cleanup. They said it was about safety. But when you live at 8,000 feet, you learn the difference between safety and power. And this wasn't about safety at all. My name is Wade. I've spent over 20 years running heavy equipment in terrain where preparation is the difference between coming home and not coming home at all. I start winter prep in August because once October hits, you don't get second chances. You either have what you need or you don't. The community around us likes to forget one detail. Pine Valley wasn't always a luxury neighborhood. It used to be my family's ranch. When developers came in back in the 80s, my grandfather sold the land, but he didn't sell everything. He kept something far more important than people realized: water. Most residents think the lake belongs to the HOA. They pay fees. They admire the views. They never ask questions. And they never notice the old spillway hidden behind my so-called eyesore property. That's where the control lives. Standing there watching my mother cry as her medical supplies melted into toxic puddles. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue paperwork. Because arguing wouldn't bring winter back under control. Instead, I remembered something my grandfather taught me when I was a kid standing beside that spillway for the first time. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it flows. The fire was only the opening move. I just didn't know it yet. The very next morning, the mailbox became a weapon. 4 certified letters. 4 different agencies. 4 different concerned citizens. Every single one signed by a member of the HOA board. Health Department. Fire Marshal. Building Code Enforcement. Environmental Compliance. Each complaint carefully written. Each accusation technical enough to sound legitimate. Each fine structured to grow daily. Together, they totaled more money than I'd make in a year. They weren't trying to correct a problem. They were trying to bury me before winter buried the roads. I've dealt with inspectors my entire life. 20 years of heavy equipment work teaches you something important. Rules are only scary if you don't know how they're applied. And people who weaponize regulations almost always break them themselves. So instead of panicking, I went to the county courthouse. Basement level. Dusty records. Deeds nobody looks at anymore. I spent 3 straight days down there while the first snowstorms rolled in outside. And what I found was incredible. Every violation they accused me of, their homes were guilty of worse. The vice president's propane system was 3 times the size of mine. Installed without permits. The treasurer's backup generator, no inspections. The president's wine cellar relied on electrical work that never passed code. And the secretary, the one filing environmental complaints, stored more fuel than I ever had, all tied to his rental operation. It was hypocrisy stacked on top of arrogance. But the real discovery wasn't about permits. It was about water. Buried in the original development papers from the 1980s was a clause most people forgot existed. My grandfather didn't just keep water rights. He kept exclusive operational control over the spillway that regulated lake levels during spring melt. That spillway wasn't community property. It never was. While they were filing paperwork trying to bankrupt me, I was reading documents that proved their million-dollar homes sat exactly where they were never supposed to be built. Flood zones don't care about luxury finishes. Water doesn't respect property values. At night, I'd come home to my mother asking the same question over and over. Where were her medicine boxes? Why were things different? Dementia doesn't understand lawsuits or HOAs. It understands safety, and safety had been taken from her deliberately. That's when this stopped being about me. Because while I was digging, I found something worse. A pattern. Elderly residents. Disabled homeowners, fines, isolation, forced sales. The same shell company buying the houses afterward. They weren't enforcing rules. They were running people out, and standing in that courthouse basement, Holding proof that connected everything together, I realized something terrifying for them. They thought winter was my weakness. They forgot that spring was coming. Winter dragged on longer than anyone expected. Record snowfall, roads closing for days at a time. The kind of winter that separates people who understand the mountains from people who just vacation in them. While the HOA board escaped to beaches and cocktail bars, I stayed. Every morning, I checked the weather logs, snowpack depth, overnight temperatures, water pressure readings, the same routine my grandfather taught me when I was barely tall enough to see over the spillway railing. This wasn't obsession. This was responsibility. The spillway system wasn't modern. No touchscreen panels, no cloud-based monitoring, just steel gears, mechanical pumps, and manual overrides, built in an era when things were designed to survive decades of neglect and still work when lives depended on them. 15 years since the gates had been fully opened. But I tested them every month, all winter long, and every test told me the same thing. When spring came, the system would respond. At night, my mother would sit near the window, watching the snow glow under moonlight. Dementia had taken names, dates, whole memories, but it hadn't taken instincts. She knew something was building. "Is the water ready?" she asked one evening, using words she hadn't spoken in years. "It's ready," I told her. By February, the legal picture was clear. The HOA board wasn't just harassing residents. They were coordinating, targeting people who couldn't fight back, forcing sales, flipping properties, and pocketing millions. Federal investigators started calling. That's when the board panicked. They tried to paint me as unstable, obsessed, dangerous, claimed my weather logs were paranoia, that my spillway maintenance was erratic behavior. They even hired a private investigator to follow me. That plan backfired in spectacular fashion. Instead of finding instability, the investigator documented professionalism, safety procedures, maintenance records, 40 years of accident-free water management. His photos showed someone doing exactly what the county expected a spillway operator to do during a record winter. The judge saw it immediately. Anyone managing mountain water who isn't tracking spring melt, the judge said, is the real danger. That's when the board made their biggest mistake. They tried to stop me from operating the spillway during peak melt season. A restraining order, temporary, sloppy, and rescinded within hours once county. Officials realized what it would do downstream. But by then the damage was done, because weather reports were confirming what I'd known since January. 3 days of sustained 70-degree temperatures were coming. 40 years of snowpack doesn't melt politely. It releases. And when it does, water always follows the oldest path first. The path my family never gave up. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to do my job. March 15th arrived like a ticking clock in slow motion. Crystal clear mountain air, sunshine reflecting off untouched snow, temperatures climbing towards 72 degrees, the perfect storm for snowpack release. By 7 a.m., the thermometer nudged past 65, and the lake began to sigh. 40 years of accumulated snow was ready to move, and my hands were on the levers, my eyes on the gauges my grandfather installed decades before. The HOA board expected a showdown at the community center, cameras, flashbulbs, dramatic speeches. They were ready to present themselves as concerned leaders, protecting residents from dangerous property owners. Instead, they delivered their own downfall. I started the spillway release, 20% capacity at first, managing initial melt. The lake heaved and muddy mountain water began its journey toward the flood zones they'd illegally built on. By 10:30 a.m., chaos and justice intertwined. Cheryl Kensington's $85,000 wine cellar floated like corks in a brown river. Trevor Ashworth's $180,000 home theater was underwater, the screens bobbing beside leather chairs. His oversized heated pool overflowed as the basement drainage failed. Marissa Vale's luxury spa complex, underground hot tubs, and sauna became underwater sculptures, equipment worth over $220,000 swallowed by natural forces. Douglas Whitfield's vacation rental basement, furniture and equipment over $150,000, vanished beneath the surge. Luxury homes, built with falsified surveys, illegal permits, and insurance fraud, could not resist the simplest law of physics. Water flows downhill. And in Pine Valley, the downhill led straight to the flood easement my family controlled. Phones rang. Panic spread. The board's Hawaii vacation tans hadn't prepared them for reality. Cheryl's scream, pointing at me, was captured on live TV. Trevor ran for his floating BMW. Marissa frantically tried to salvage spa equipment. Douglas realized the consequences of 3 years of illegal profits in 90 minutes. I held up decades of spillway operation logs to the cameras. Calm, methodical, responsible. Just doing my job exactly like my grandfather taught. Channel 7 News covered every second. Social media exploded. Viewers witnessed luxury paradise, transformed into a lesson about property rights and ethics. HOA corruption, elder abuse, and insurance fraud exposed in real time. Emergency responders confirmed everything. Spillway operations followed proper protocols. Downstream residents were safe. Fire hazards from illegal propane systems were eliminated. Federal investigators had all the documentation they needed. By sunset, the board faced $2.88 million in uninsured damages. Federal charges followed immediately. Conspiracy, elder abuse, real estate fraud, insurance fraud. Cheryl Kensington got 3 years in federal prison. Trevor, Marissa, and Douglas faced financial and criminal ruin. The days after March 15th brought a strange calm to Pine Valley. The board's luxury homes, once symbols of arrogance, now bore the consequences of ignoring both nature and the law. I sat on the porch with my mother, watching the lake spillway hum under the steady release of water. The snowpack had delivered exactly what I expected. Pressure that forced their basements and entertainment complexes into watery chaos. But the most important thing wasn't the destruction of property. It was that justice had been served responsibly. Every drop released was in line with decades of emergency flood protocols. Each illegal basement submerged was a direct result of their own disregard for safety and regulations. My mother, for the first time in months, asked fewer questions about missing medicine boxes and more about water, levels, and spillway operations. Something in her memory recognized the shift in power, the restoration of order, and the protection of genuine residents downstream. While the media buzzed around the flooded mansions, the FBI continued gathering evidence, this time with irrefutable proof of systematic abuse, real estate fraud, and insurance falsifications. The luxury lakefront properties, once pristine symbols of entitlement, were now empty, soaked, and unsalvageable. Trevor's $180,000 home theater floated like a small vessel. Cheryl's wine cellar was reduced to floating corks, and Marissa's spa complex turned into an underwater landscape of ruined tiles and equipment. Douglas's vacation rental, a hive of illegal modifications, was now completely submerged, leaving him scrambling to salvage anything. And while all this chaos unfolded, the court system worked in parallel. Federal prosecutors had the conspiracy case in hand, and local news coverage transformed public perception. I wasn't a dangerous hoarder anymore. I was the man who safeguarded. Pine Valley exposing decades of corruption. Neighboring residents, once complicit through silence, began recognizing the reality. The board had created vulnerability, and their own greed had caused the crisis. From that porch, I watched it all unfold, feeling a rare calm. Nature had followed the law, and the law had reinforced justice. Every photograph, every logbook, every hydraulic reading was documented, proving that my family's preparation had saved lives and ensured fairness. The Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund, which I began planning months earlier, now seemed inevitable. Stockpiles for elderly residents, medical aid, and legal support for anyone facing the same type of HOA abuse. In these early spring days, Pine Valley learned a lesson. Preparation, knowledge, and patience outweigh wealth and deceit. And for the first time in years, the lake reflected not just the sunlight, but the justice that had finally been delivered. This was the moment when the mountains reminded everyone that they obey no one's ego. March 16th dawned with clear skies and the first real warmth of spring. Pine Valley had become a study in contrasts. On one side, the sprawling luxury mansions of Cheryl, Trevor, Marissa, and Douglas were beginning to feel the consequences of winter accumulation, combined with poor planning. Their basements had already taken on water overnight, transforming elaborate entertainment, setups, and high-end wine, cellars into floating chaos. Meanwhile, downstream residents, whose safety was genuinely my responsibility, remained completely unaffected thanks to precise spillway control. The water flowed exactly where it should. guided by 40 years of family knowledge and meticulous records. My mother, seated in her favorite chair, asked once more about the spillway, her voice a mix of curiosity and residual concern. "Is everything under control?" she asked, using the mountain terminology she had known since childhood. I reassured her calmly, monitoring hydraulic pressures, valve positions, and flow rates. Every gauge, every log, every temperature. Reading was being tracked with the precision of decades-long expertise. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage that would later go viral. Channel 7's live coverage had turned what the board expected to be a narrative of danger into a spectacle of accountability. Viewers could see luxury homes partially submerged while I, the so-called dangerous property owner, managed emergency operations with calm professionalism. The irony was delicious. These were the same people who had spent months filing complaints, targeting vulnerable residents, and destroying $22,000 of essential winter supplies. Now the very snow melt they had ignored became their undoing. Mid-morning brought a rapid acceleration in snowpack runoff. Spillway gates, set to open incrementally, allowed a controlled yet powerful flow. Trevor's illegal heated pool overflowed into the main basement. Marissa's spa complex was under 30 inches of rushing water, and Cheryl's wine collection floated helplessly, corks bobbing in muddy currents. Douglas's rental furniture, worth over $150,000, was now submerged, evidence of what happens when luxury construction ignores natural hydrology. Federal investigators, alerted to the coordinated property and insurance fraud, arrived on site, confirming that all emergency procedures were executed correctly. Their interviews and photographs would cement the board members' fate in the coming weeks. As the day progressed, my mother seemed to relax, understanding instinctively that her home was safe and that justice, long delayed, was finally being administered. For the first time in months, the tension of isolation and harassment lifted, replaced by a sense of triumph born from preparation, knowledge, and patient observation. By late afternoon, the media coverage had spread across social platforms. By March 17th, Pine Valley had become a living example of natural justice, combined with meticulous preparation. Overnight, the accelerated snowmelt had intensified, and the spillway was operating at maximum capacity to safely manage the sudden influx of water. The luxury homes of Cheryl, Trevor, Marissa, and Douglas, constructed in violation of original flood easements, bore the full consequences of their arrogance. Their basements were fully submerged, electrical systems short-circuited, and valuable personal property floating amidst the muddy currents. My mother observed quietly from the porch, asking fewer questions about the water each hour, her confidence in our preparedness growing with every controlled flow and measurement logged at the hydraulic control panel in our basement. Across town, residents who had once faced harassment or isolation could now witness the principles of responsible water management in action. The spillway's mechanical systems, designed and maintained by generations of garrison engineers, executed precisely timed releases, protecting downstream communities and infrastructure while delivering a direct, unavoidable lesson to those who ignored both the law and natural forces. Media crews captured every moment, broadcasting live footage that juxtaposed responsible management against the disastrous outcomes of illegal construction and fraudulent permits. Channel 7, initially expecting a confrontation, now narrated a story of accountability and expertise. Federal investigators documented the ongoing emergency, gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to support criminal charges for coordinated fraud, elder abuse, and insurance violations. Cheryl's desperate attempts to portray herself as a concerned community leader crumbled visibly on camera as her submerged wine cellar and flooded living spaces told a different story. Trevor, attempting to salvage his luxury pool and home theater, was met with the undeniable force of 2 million gallons of water per hour, precisely channeled through decades of spillway knowledge. Marissa's spa retreat, once a symbol of untouchable wealth, had become an underwater exhibit of the consequences of rule-breaking. Douglas's vacation rental basements, filled with illegally stored furnishings, were now muddy chambers serving as testimony to a pattern of systemic fraud. Throughout the day, I meticulously documented every flow, every gate position, every rising inch of water, ensuring that my actions would be defensible under both county regulations, and federal oversight. Residents downstream reported uninterrupted water safety, proving that the emergency drainage operations were executed flawlessly. The contrast between destruction of illicit wealth and protection of the community was stark, a visual narrative that no legal argument could distort. By late March, the aftermath of the Pine Valley flood had become undeniable proof of both accountability and expert preparation. While Cheryl, Trevor, Marissa, and Douglas faced total devastation of their illegally built luxury homes, the rest of the community experienced zero downstream damage. My meticulous logs of hydraulic, control operations, and flow rates proved that every action followed 40 years of family established protocols designed to manage extreme snowmelt events safely. Federal investigators documented each flooded property, linking destruction directly to violation of original 1962 flood easements and falsified elevation certificates. The evidence was irrefutable. Coordinated fraud, insurance manipulation, and systematic elder abuse had led to the very consequences the perpetrators had ignored for years. Channel 7 aired detailed coverage showing both the responsible handling of emergency water management and the preventable destruction of illegally constructed lakefront homes. Across social media, viewers praised the precise execution of the spillway, protocol, and the accountability served to corrupt officials. By March 18th, the board members were forced to respond publicly. Cheryl attempted to claim emergency protocols had been misused. Trevor insisted the damage was unexpected. Marissa blamed rapid snowmelt, and Douglas cited unprecedented weather patterns. But every claim crumbled under the weight of documented history. Survey maps, hydraulic records, and weather logs proved that the flood was entirely predictable and manageable. Their luxury homes had become waterlogged warnings, frozen in time as evidence of reckless construction and greed. Meanwhile, my mother's routine stabilized, her confidence returning as she observed that our property, medical supplies, and essential provisions remained secure. Residents previously intimidated by HOA harassment came forward, offering testimony for federal investigators and affirming the systematic pressure they had faced. The federal conspiracy case gained momentum, citing coordinated targeting of vulnerable families, fraudulent property acquisitions via Pine Valley Properties LLC, and deliberate misrepresentation of flood zone compliance. Local authorities praised the precision and legality of spillway operations, noting that every downstream home was protected, as required by county emergency protocols. By March 20th, legal filings confirmed the board members were facing felony charges, including conspiracy, elder abuse, real estate fraud, insurance violations. Public attention amplified community awareness, inspiring other neighborhoods to research property rights, flood easements, and HOA compliance. The Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund, established earlier, began outreach programs to support residents affected by both the flood and previous systemic abuse. Neighboring communities sought advice on implementing similar emergency protocols and legal oversight for water management. By early April, the true impact of Pine Valley's spring melt had become clear. The floodwaters had receded, and while the luxury homes of the corrupt HOA board members displayed permanent watermarks, the rest of the community emerged entirely unharmed. Residents who had been intimidated, isolated, or forced out under the guise of community safety began to rebuild their trust and reclaim their lives. The Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund provided immediate assistance, delivering emergency supplies, medical equipment, and support to the elderly who had previously faced abuse. My mother's routine fully stabilized. Her stress and confusion reduced as she watched neighbors collaborate instead of isolate. Federal investigations intensified, with interviews and documentation from 6 previous victims demonstrating a consistent pattern of fraud and elder abuse perpetrated by Cheryl Kensington, Trevor Ashworth, Marissa Vale, and Douglas Whitfield. Evidence from hydraulic logs, survey maps, and weather reports proved beyond doubt that emergency water management was executed perfectly and legally, protecting every downstream resident while exposing the negligence of the board members. By mid-April, criminal charges were formally filed, including conspiracy, insurance fraud, elder abuse, and real estate violations. Local media continued extensive coverage, highlighting not only the justice served, but the exemplary response to natural hazards that prevented further disaster. Community awareness grew rapidly, prompting neighboring HOA communities to investigate their own governance and compliance practices, particularly regarding flood zones and emergency preparedness. Volunteers organized workshops, teaching residents how to maintain emergency supplies and operate local water management systems in accordance with legal protocols. The contrast was stark. The board members' luxury homes remained waterlogged and uninsured, a vivid illustration of how arrogance, fraudulent documentation, and disregard for historic property rights can have costly consequences. Meanwhile, my mother and I spent quiet evenings on the porch, observing the natural flow of the lake, noting that the spillway now operated exactly as it had for decades, securely, predictably, and in alignment with both law and safety standards. Her instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of mountain living, recognized that everything was finally stable, even if her memory couldn't recall the full sequence of events. The broader message resonated: preparation, patience, and respect for both nature and legal rights can counteract even the most deliberate attempts at manipulation. Residents began discussing the importance of documenting property rights, flood easements, and historical agreements, ensuring future generations would understand the protective measures embedded in the land long before the construction of luxury mansions. By May, Pine Valley had fully transitioned from a winter survival crisis to a season of rebuilding, education, and community empowerment. The residents who had once been silenced by harassment and intimidation now actively participated in neighborhood meetings, workshops, and coordinated emergency drills. My mother and I had established routines around the spillway operations and emergency supply stockpiles that became public demonstrations. For neighbors, residents began learning firsthand about proper flood management, snowmelt monitoring, and the critical importance of legal water rights. The Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund had grown beyond a reactive relief effort, establishing structured programs that offered medical equipment loans, emergency transport assistance, and legal aid for anyone facing HOA abuse. Federal investigators continued collecting evidence, and the public narrative shifted entirely. The corrupt HOA board members were now universally recognized as criminals whose deliberate exploitation had caused tangible harm to families and the community. Media coverage highlighted not only their misdeeds, but also the model of responsible emergency management demonstrated during the spring melt. Pine Valley became a case study in resilience. Residents learned how historical property rights, detailed record-keeping, and systematic preparation could defend them against corruption while simultaneously safeguarding the environment. Families began reviewing historical deeds, flood easements, and construction permits to understand their own vulnerabilities and protective measures embedded in the landscape. The contrast between the illegal luxury homes and the rest of the community remained stark, with watermarks and damage serving as a visual reminder of the consequences of arrogance and fraudulent documentation. Volunteers taught residents how to safely operate backup generators, manage winter fuel supplies, and maintain proper food and medical stockpiles, ensuring that no one faced isolation without resources in the future. Workshops also emphasized legal literacy, enabling residents to recognize abusive HOA tactics and understand steps for filing legitimate complaints, documenting violations, and seeking federal or civil intervention when necessary. The combination of environmental management, legal strategy, and community organization transformed Pine Valley from a community at risk into a model for mountain preparedness and justice. My mother's demeanor stabilized completely. She observed and participated in small ways, reinforcing routines that validated both her autonomy and the effectiveness of long-term preparation. By documenting every step from hydraulic operations to emergency supply distribution, residents gained a sense of control and accountability previously denied by corrupt authorities. Pine Valley's story spread statewide, inspiring legislative discussions about elder protection, HOA transparency, and flood zone compliance. By early summer, Pine Valley had fully recovered from the winter crisis, and the community was thriving in ways that no one could have predicted. Families who had been intimidated or harassed by the former HOA board now participated in local decision-making, community preparedness drills, and environmental stewardship projects. The The spillway operations, once a private responsibility, became a central demonstration for residents to understand flood management and water rights enforcement. Workshops under the Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund taught proper snowmelt monitoring, emergency supply stockpiling, and safe operation of backup generators, while also providing guidance for navigating HOA disputes and documenting violations. My mother, once anxious and confused, now took pride in observing the restored routines and witnessing the community reclaiming both safety and autonomy. The previously illegal luxury homes, still bearing visible watermarks, stood as a cautionary reminder of the consequences of fraudulent construction and reckless disregard for environmental law. Federal investigations into the HOA conspiracy had yielded criminal charges and public restitution, providing additional validation for residents who had previously felt powerless. Residents began checking their own property rights, water easements, and flood zone classifications, discovering protections that allowed them to prevent exploitation in the future. Emergency preparedness became a shared responsibility, with neighbors cooperating on medical supply distribution, snow clearance, and winter heating logistics, ensuring no family would ever be left vulnerable again. The media continued to highlight Pine Valley's transformation, portraying the town as a model of resilience, strategic planning, and justice restored. Legislative discussions followed, inspired by Pine Valley's example, emphasizing elder protection, HOA transparency, and strict verification of flood zone permits. The social dynamics shifted dramatically. Families that had been isolated were now central participants in decision-making, community safety, and environmental management. Volunteer groups coordinated training sessions for emergency scenarios, teaching younger residents the skills required to operate hydraulic controls, monitor snowpack, and maintain historical flood data. My mother's stabilized condition reflected the broader community recovery. Her stress levels decreased, routines were respected, and the sense of security returned. The former board members' fraudulent practices served as a lesson in accountability, demonstrating the consequences of abusing authority and neglecting legal obligations. Pine Valley's lakes, spillways, and infrastructure now operated according to decades of established protocols, balancing ecological integrity with community safety. By late summer, Pine Valley had transformed into a model community that balanced natural beauty, environmental responsibility, and social harmony. The lakes and spillways operated as intended, providing both flood protection and recreational opportunities for residents who now understood the importance of historical water rights and proper emergency planning. Families once intimidated or harassed by the previous HOA board were now empowered, participating actively in decisions about community development, winter preparedness, and environmental conservation. My mother, whose health and peace of mind had been jeopardized during the winter, now thrived within the restored routines of everyday life, her confusion replaced with pride and contentment. The Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund became fully operational, offering emergency supplies, medical assistance, transportation services, and legal aid for residents who might otherwise have faced isolation during harsh winters. Educational programs ensured that all families knew how to monitor snowpack, operate spillway systems safely, and respond to extreme weather conditions, creating a network of informed and resilient residents. The former board members, having faced criminal convictions and financial restitution, served as a cautionary tale of the consequences of abusing power and neglecting legal and ethical responsibilities. Their former properties, still marked by floodwater, reminded the community that nature and law work together to enforce accountability. Pine Valley gained national recognition for its innovative approach to combining legal empowerment, emergency preparedness, and community engagement. Neighborly relations improved dramatically, with once skeptical residents collaborating to strengthen emergency protocols, restore public spaces, and rebuild trust. Local media highlighted the success of the Mountain Winter Preparedness Fund, inspiring other towns in Colorado and beyond to adopt similar strategies for elder protection, disaster readiness, and responsible water management. My mother and I often sit on our porch at sunset, watching the lake's natural flow, knowing that justice was not only restored but sustainable. Children play along the safe lakefront. Volunteers teach emergency management skills, and neighbors exchanged smiles and stories of resilience. Pine Valley had endured corruption, harassment, and environmental mismanagement, but it emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. The winter that once threatened life and property became the catalyst for transformation, teaching everyone the power of preparation, patience, and community solidarity. Justice, education, and careful stewardship had turned a personal battle into a legacy of protection, empowerment, and harmony.